I brought a news story today that I would love to share. It's kind of a feel-good article that I
Okay.
think highlights how regional food systems can have a really big impact on the communities that they're in.
I'm into it. This sounds great.
So the article that we are going to be talking about today is from Civil Eats. And I don't know if you saw this, but Civil Eats has actually removed their paywall. And so any stories that we've shared from Civil Eats are now free to anyone. So, as always, we'll include the link in the show notes of this episode. And anybody who wants to do a deeper dive or read more about the story, they can find the link there. The article is titled, How a Vermont Cheesemaker Helps Local Farms Thrive. And it covers the story of brothers and cheesemakers, Mateo and Andy Keeler, who are founders of Jasper Hill Farm in Greensboro, Vermont.
So
Yeah.
good.
So the brothers actually grew up visiting Greensboro. They would regularly visit Caspian Lake, which is in town, and they always dreamed of owning land in the area. And in I think it was like the late 90s, they decided to do so. They actually took the risk. They jumped in, even though at the time land prices were particularly high in the area, because if you remember the late 90s, aging myself, this was the time of the dot-com bubble. And there was a lot of tech money out there. And at the time they were buying up land, particularly in this area. And it was like non-farmers that were, buying up this land. But so they did, the brothers decided to make the jump. They bought the land. And at the time, if I remember correctly from the article, they were craftsmen, both of them. But as they moved into Greensboro and started spending time there, they decided to change course. They decided to become cheesemakers and to really work the land. And that's how they founded Jasper Hill Farm. But Jasper Hill was not merely about profit, making money. It was also for them about leading a life that had purpose at its core. Mateo's actually quoted in the article saying, Jasper Hill grew out of this notion that a whole life is encompassed by three intrinsic needs: meaningful work in a place that you love with the people that you love. We started with this idea that we need to figure out how to capture more value and retain more value and take control of price, essentially, in a way that would give us some agency in the future of our participation in a market system. And that is how they came to cheese. They saw cheese as this value-added product that fit the bill.
This is, I think, a good stopping point or time to talk about the realities of the dairy industry. If we go back to 1973, I'm going to share a little history here. There was a gentleman by the name of Earl Butz who served as the Secretary of Agriculture under President Nixon. And infamously, Earl Butz said that farmers should, quote, get big or get out. And this philosophy essentially encouraged agricultural consolidation and the industrialization of farming. And as a result of that, the number of farms in the United States began to steadily decline. And it has continued to decline ever since. In the article, Civil Eats calls out the 2022 Census of Agriculture. And what that census tells us is that the number of dairy operations that are actually able to sell milk has decreased by almost 39% in just 5 years. And in 2020 alone, over 2,500 U.S. dairy farms were forced to cease operations. So we're seeing a lot of consolidation. We're seeing a lot of the closing of family farms. And a big part of this is the reality that in the commodity market, you don't know what you're going to get paid for the milk that you are selling until after you've already delivered it. And that price can be different every single time you sell milk. So how can farmers be successful in a market like this? It's insanely difficult. especially if you're not willing to consolidate or industrialize to a certain degree.
Yeah, and going back to the topic of our main episode today, how can they make any plans? How can
Right.
they if they have no idea what the price is? And
Yeah.
so that brings us back to Jasper Hill, right?
Mm-hmm.
The brothers actually pay 2 times the global market rate for milk
Yeah.
to make their cheese. And one of their suppliers is farm Hillside Homestead,
Mm-hmm.
and their founders have actually shared that the price of milk, let me see if I can get this right. The price of milk has stayed the same since the 80s,
Yeah.
even though their costs have gone up.
Yeah. I think an interesting thing, and I don't have all of the like details and facts like on hand right now, and perhaps it's something we talk about in the future. But when you talk about a commodity market, right, you as the farmer, whether you're selling cherries or grapes or milk, have zero control over the price that you get to sell your product at. There's a
Mm,
lot that depends on supply and demand, right? And various other factors. And so you grow or produce a product and then you put it to market and then you are told how much you will be paid for that product. And so what this is essentially saying is that since the 1980s, the price of milk that farmers have been getting paid has essentially remained the same. Of course there's a bit of
mm.
fluctuation, but it's essentially the same. And if we talk about or think about all of the costs that have increased since 2020 alone,
Alone? Yeah.
and now we're looking back to the 80s. I mean, the struggles of a dairy farmer are just compounding as this conversation goes on, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But to bring it back to some positives and back to Jasper Hill and what they're
Yeah.
doing. So they actually also, not only are they paying that, double the market price
Mm-hmm.
to their suppliers, but they also are committed to sourcing only within 15 miles of their farm. And what
Yeah.
that does is it allows 82 cents of every dollar of profit to stay within the state of Vermont. But even further, 62 cents of that dollar are staying in Greensboro itself, which is really making Greensboro one of the most financially rewarding places to be a farmer in the United States right now.
It's really interesting. I love how in the article they also share how the brothers track this information and sort of keep an eye on it. It's really cool.
Yeah. And the brothers have actually said like they can afford to pay that higher price because they sell cheese at a premium.
Mm-hmm.
Mateo is actually quoted as saying, "We're building a pipeline to markets where there is disposable income." And it's interesting because some of Jasper Hill's best customers are, if you remember me talking about at the beginning of this story, those same people who were displacing the longtime farmers in Greensboro and that were
Yeah.
buying up all that land. But now their money gets to play a part in supporting the community.
Right.
And so by producing and selling these artisanal cheeses directly to specialty retailers and consumers that are willing to pay that premium, Jasper Hill essentially was able to bypass the global commodity market, which you were just talking about.
Yeah. I want to pause here and talk to you about just what you were saying about the fact that Jasper Hill is creating a premium product. This is something that I've talked to a number of good food founders about, something that I struggled with when I had my food business years ago. And that's the idea that you might be creating a product that you can't afford to buy personally, or you're creating a product that people in your immediate community cannot afford to buy. And there is I think an ethical dilemma that comes along with that, especially in the case where you've had people displacing farmers and now they are your customers, right? But what we learn from Jasper Hill and in this article is that while the farmers, let's just say, right, or perhaps even the folks at Jasper Hill, if we're using this as an example, might not be the typical consumer of that cheese. There are long tail benefits of Jasper Hill's market position and the fact that they are a premium product. If they weren't selling at a premium, they couldn't afford to pay farmers 2x the commodity rate, right? And if you're not paying the farmers the 2x commodity rate, in order to sell a lower priced non-premium product, how are you benefiting the farmer? Right?
Yeah.
They're just in the same situation as the standard commodity market.
In fact, for Hillside Homestead, the supplier we talked about a minute ago, their partnership with Jasper Hill has become crucial for their farm's viability because those higher milk prices from Jasper Hill not only have improved their profitability as a farm, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's helped them to qualify for loans that they wouldn't have before and utilize that to really establish their own farm.
Yeah.
And they've actually they talk about in the article about how they're taking what they've learned from Jasper Hill and they now have a long-term goal to diversify their income by launching an ice cream company.
Yeah. That's amazing. And I'm just sort of sitting here thinking like the reason or the way that we got to what I always refer to as artificially low priced food, despite the fact that retailers are price gouging and, you know, definitely raising prices higher than what they quote unquote need to based on the cost that they're incurring, you know, for eggs and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
We got here by exploiting farmers. We got here by exploiting the land. We got here by doing a number of bad things. And so I think we have to grapple with all the realities of our world in a way, right? And say, okay, what is the path to making things better for everybody? It's imperfect because our world, our industry is so imperfect. But what can we do? What are the positive impacts that we can have, even in this imperfect industry? And I think Jasper Hill and this article is really demonstrating that we can create a premium product. We can pay our producers more. We can, you know, do what we can to improve the lives of the people in our community and in our supply chain. And I think that if we're doing that regionally, you know, throughout our country, like things are just going to get better and better. And the imperfectness of our industry and our world, you know, will start to change a little bit. The more people that are employed that are not being taken advantage of, that have better working conditions, that can actually perhaps afford a home and to not work multiple jobs and on and on and on.
And to what you're speaking about, I think one of the things that has really allowed Jasper Hill to do that, right, is not prioritizing rapid growth, maximum profit, but really strategizing like horizontal growth
Yeah.
that allows them to grow at their own pace, to maintain their identity, and to support those around them.
Absolutely. And I think if we go back to what Earl Butz said, get big or get out, that mentality still exists in our
Mm-hmm.
food industry today. I mean, that is what we see touted, right? On like, oh, you're a CPG brand, you got to get big and you got to get big fast, right? But in order to do that, consolidation and industrialization occur, right? It occurred in farming, it occurred in processed food, and it continues to occur. And so if we're trying to do something differently, if we're trying to create an impact, I think we have to do the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And I think we talk about that often here, but this is just a moment where we can go, here's why. If we don't want to perpetuate consolidation and industrialization, and we want to have more businesses like Jasper Hill, more communities like Greensboro, Vermont, we have to go, okay, not get big or get out.
Yeah. And I think also not only should we strive for this, but it's possible.
Yes. Yes. It's possible.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me for that story. I told you it would be
Yeah.
heartwarming and feel good.
And really energizing. And I think confirming of why we do what we do, why so many of our listeners do what they do as well. And so thank you on many levels for bringing that article to the podcast today, Chelsea. It was wonderful.